at the stomach, really a few things the stomach is doing. It's going to be one of the other spots where we have a decent amount of mechanical and chemical digestion taking place. The other thing it really does is let the body kind of store some of the food that you ingest, and is a way to really kind of divvy it out to the small intestine where most of the digestion is going to take place as it's capable of handling it and not as you ingest it. The other thing is having that large acid bath in there. It is a really good immune defense system. So the stomach, we're going to see kind of upper left quadrant. It's right beneath the diaphragm, kind of just to the medial of the spleen. Again, going to do some mechanical digestion here with moving stuff around. The other thing we're going to see is there is a couple of enzymes, mainly starting protein chemical digestion with an enzyme called pepsin. There is also a lipase that starts to be made here. Not a lot of absorption of it taking place, but we're going to see a little bit happening there. Foods spend a little bit of time here before they move on to the digestive tract, and we'll see that there is the ability to absorb some stuff through the stomach wall, alcohol being one of those things, and water, but not a lot of other substances. So you can see, looking at the stomach here, you can see where the esophagus comes in. The region right next to that, because if you have acid go up in here, you get heartburn. They call this the cardiac region. The highest region on the stomach, highest region on the uterus, they always call the fundus. So this is the fundic region. You have the main body. There is these folds that will let the stomach expand, as well as serve as kind of washboard bumps to kind of help break up food. The other thing we'll see, we have a pyloric region in this narrowing where we have this large sphincter that controls the exit of stuff out of the stomach, and that's the pyloric sphincter, and this would be the cardiac or lower esophageal sphincter. And this will then empty stuff into the duodenum. They can talk about it having a greater curvature and a lesser curvature. Those are those two little J curves when the stomach is kind of that angled pouch like that. Like I said, that cardiac orifice is where it's opening into the esophagus. Again, a lot of times they use a lot of cardia and cardiac with that one. Fundus is the top of it. Like I said, the body and the pylorus are each of those regions that we kind of looked at. And again, the sphincters are controlling entrance in, into, and out of the stomach, helping maintain stuff in the stomach, as well as allowing it to exit or enter, depending on which sphincter we're talking about. These gastric folds, called rugae, help to grind on the food, as well as allow the stomach to be able to expand. The other thing that we see with the stomach is there is the inner circular layer and that outer longitudinal layer on the stomach. There's also a third layer called an oblique layer of muscle on this one, and this is given us that third layer. One of the things the stomach is going to do quite a bit of is the segmentation, and this third layer allows the stomach to have a few more movement types than we'd see in a lot of the other parts of the alimentary canal. If you look at the stomach, it is going to be a lot of simple columnar. We have these large, like the surface with these pits dropping down into it, called gastric pits. We'll look at these kind of from the side here. These gastric pits have these glandular epithelium that line them, and they're going to be making a number of different things that are going to be important to the functioning of the stomach. There is this muscularis, like I said, to the stomach. There's that third layer to it, that inner oblique layer on top, with inside of the middle circular layer and the outer longitudinal layer. And we'll see these layers tend to get a little bit thicker as they work their way closer to the exit here. Outside of that, we do have a serosa and the visceral peritoneum surrounding the stomach. So this shows you these gastric glands. You can see from the side, they look like these little finger-like projections coming up, but if you look at them at the surface, these are going to be little holes that are dropping down in here. And these are going to be lined with a few different cell types that are going to end up being important to us. So we have mucus glands, we have parietal cells and chief cells, as well as there are going to be some what are called enteroendocrine. If you see entero on the front of something, it usually means digestive related, so enteroendocrine just means digestive endocrine. Again, up near the top of this, you have what are called mucous neck cells. These are secreting a mucus that is picking up some of this acid from the parietal cells that are beneath here. The parietal cells really make the components that, when they're secreted into solution, become hydrochloric acid. We're going to see the chief cells release an inactive form of an enzyme called pepsin. The inactive form is pepsinogen. Again, another one of those ogens like fibrinogen. This is going to get activated, we'll see, by the stomach acid, as well as self-activates once the enzyme becomes active. We see pepsin is involved. It is a protease. It's involved in breaking down proteins. Where the other thing we've seen here is there is stomach enteroendocrine glands that are releasing something called gastrin, which is a hormone that acts back on the stomach as well as interacts with the digestive tract. Again, doing a little bit of that endocrine interplay that we talk about. So again, you can see these mucous neck cells, the parietal cells a little bit lower than the chief cells. Nothing I'm going to have you identifying or telling apart. I would say maybe be able to identify the stomach on a slide, but we're not going to get real crazy on the rest of this. Again, there's going to be a number of different mucus, a number of different cells here. So these surface mucus cells, we have the mucous neck cells. These are secreting some acidic mucus. The surface mucus cells, these are secreting mucus that have a lot of bicarbonate in them. Bicarbonate is an alkaline. What this helps to do is it prevents any of that acid that's being released from those gastric pits to actually come into contact with the stomach lining. And again, this is going to protect the stomach from digesting itself. Protects it from those enzymes, protects it from high acidity, really keeps the stomach from being damaged by itself. If you get Helicobacter pylori, a bacteria, it sometimes can lead to loss of this and can lead to ulcers. Like I said, the mucous neck cells produce this acidic mucus, which is going to help maintain the acid and levels in the stomach. The parietal cells are involved in making this, so they are making secreting a lot of the hydrogen and chlorine ions that are necessary to make this hydrochloric acid. So, in a way to think about it, parietal cells do produce the hydrochloric acid, but they're not secreting out hydrochloric acid. They're secreting out hydrogen ions and chlorine ions, kind of by working through this cell. There's something that's called a proton pump involved in this. It is where some of those different anti-acid drugs can actually work to do this. Things like Prilosec is a proton pump inhibitor. And again, the hydrochloric acid is doing a number of different things. One of the things it does is it activates the enzyme pepsinogen to active pepsin. But a bigger thing here is, we could do that other ways. The main thing it's doing here is it kills most microorganisms that are going to enter your digestive tract, and also helps to kind of loosen up a lot of connective tissues and denature proteins to allow chemical digestion to happen easier. And this again shows what's going on in that parietal cell. We're taking chlorine ions from that chloride shift from when oxygen and carbon dioxide are moving in and out of the bloodstream, so we know we have a lot of chlorine in there. We are then using these parietal cells to pump that across the cell. The other thing this is doing is using CO2 generated in the cell to generate bicarbonate ion as well as a hydroxyl ion, and can use that to kind of release hydrogen ions from that, which allows us to send those hydrogen ions in there. So that is that proton pump that I was talking about. And some of those major antacid type of things that are not just like Tums or something else like that, those would actually help. They inhibit this step. So like I said, the chief cells, these are making what's called pepsinogen. This is an inactive form of this. Most of our proteases we're going to see are made in inactive forms. We get to the small intestine, we'll have something called trypsinogen that gets activated to trypsin. These ogens are, like I said, pro-enzymes. They need to be cleaved in order to become active. What we're going to see with pepsinogen is actually that hydrochloric acid that cleaves it and makes it active. And this is going to be able to break down proteins at certain amino acid sequences into smaller peptides. The other thing we're seeing is there is a little bit of gastric lipase being released. Limited role in fat digestion compared to further down here, but it does start the process. So we can see with the stomach, there is more mechanical digestion taking place by the fact that that is using those rugae to kind of break things up. Chemical digestion of proteins really starts in earnest here. And we're seeing a little bit of fat digestion, but much more so of fats in the small intestine. These G cells are those enteroendocrine cells. These release gastrin. It can stimulate the stomach to secrete more as well as become more muscularly active. It also is influenced by some of these other hormones that we're going to see that the small intestine can release. So again, it kind of shows you all these ones here. To me, knowing what these cells are and what they make is going to be kind of the big deal there. So the surface mucus ones make that alkaline mucus, so the stomach doesn't digest itself. Where the parietal cells, along with the mucous neck cells, a lot of acid being made there. Chief cells make the pepsinogen and a little bit of the gastric lipase, where the G cells are going to be doing that endocrine function of the stomach. When we kind of mix all these juices together with what you've ingested, this is what we refer to as chyme. And again, in the stomach, we have both mechanical digestion by all the stuff getting mixed together and grinding in the stomach, chemical digestion by the fact that pepsinogen is being activated to pepsin, and that is going to start digesting proteins. As I was also saying, pepsin can self-activate. So once you get a little bit of pepsinogen activated by the hydrochloric acid, that active pepsin can actually cleave pepsinogen into active forms of pepsin, so it kind of does a little bit of positive feedback on that one and can really activate that stuff quite quickly when necessary. A lot of mixing takes place in the stomach. Again, form of mechanical digestion using some of those rugae, and just the fact that we're mixing all this stuff together and really kind of rubbing it against the walls to try to break it up a little bit more. Kind of takes all the stuff, mixes together with that acid, loosens everything up a little bit, and what we have at that point is what we refer to as chyme. When the stomach's going to empty, stuff moves through that pyloric region to the pyloric sphincter. It gets a little bit of force against it by the stomach contracting. The sphincter will open, lets a small amount in. It will close, and then we'll get a little swirl back of that stuff going back out there. Again, we're going to see a lot of times how quickly the stomach empties is really dependent upon what you've ingested. And this shows you that gastric mixing and the formation of the chyme, a little bit of a rehash of what I was talking about here, but you can see contractions in this muscle wall. Mix everything together, you get these gradients that are going to move it towards, then after you mix it all up, towards that pyloric region. Get a little bit of pressure against this, it opens, lets a small amount in, and then you get that retropulsion, mixing it back in before it lets more into the duodenum. Again, there's pacemaker cells in the stomach. These are involved in that contraction, that rhythmic contraction. Again, the stomach allows us to ingest a large meal and not have to try to digest it right away. If we didn't have the stomach, that is like somebody who's had a gastric bypass surgery, and the amount you can eat and work with is much smaller. So the stomach allows you to be able to have this large expansion. If you've ever watched like the hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July or anything else like that, you can put a bunch of stuff in there with the expansion of that stomach and then slowly work on it. Again, lots of nervous as well as hormonal regulation that is going to influence the movements of the stomach, and that's where we get into these 3 gastric phases. So the first gastric phase is the cephalic phase, and if you think about cephalus, that is dealing with the head. So this is more of thinking about eating, thinking you're going to be eating, so smelling something, seeing something, getting a little bit of food in your mouth is going to get the stomach increasing activity, so you get increased parasympathetic activities, because remember, rest and digest is the parasympathetic. Through the vagus nerve is going to activate that stomach. That acetylcholine release there is going to start getting this muscle cells as well as the glandular epithelium to get more active, increase their activity, increase secretion. As we start ingesting this food, that's what we call the gastric phase. We start getting stretch receptors in the stomach being activated. So as food starts entering the stomach, we're going to get enteroendocrine cells to release gastrin. That is going to tell the stomach to release more substances as well as become more motile. It's going to start moving around more. That's the gastric phase. And you can see it right here on this figure here. You can see how the parasympathetic ganglion from that vagus nerve comes down here, stimulates this. You get increased gastrin release, which is going to act on the stomach to be even more active. Finally, we have the intestinal phase. As we start releasing some of this chyme into the duodenum, we're going to kind of have this a little bit more, and then a whoa kind of signal happen here. Initially, the duodenum starts getting a little bit of chyme in there. It is going to release some intestinal gastrin, which tells the stomach, yep, keep it coming. So more activity. As we get more in there, into the duodenum, it's going to activate those stretch receptors even more, and that causes duodenal cells, endocrine cells, to release a couple different hormones called cholecystokinin, which is shortened to CCK, and secretin. And both of these are kind of like a stop sign, or like the third base coach saying, whoa, don't go home type of thing to the stomach. It's going to decrease both their gastric motility as well as gastric secretions, really try to tone down the activity of the stomach a little bit. I always kind of say it's like if you're like, yep, keep backing up, backing up, backing up, backing up. Whoa, it's kind of what the stomach does. More and more and more, no, now stop. Intestinal somatostatin is also part of that, helps inhibit the release of gastric juices. And again, a lot of other things can influence this based on sympathetic activity. If you start becoming really active and exercising, it will decrease stomach activity. And again, kind of showing the idea here how the small intestine gets interacting with this and how it's going to feedback and inhibit. Really, some of the last stuff to talk about here is with the gastric absorption. We don't absorb a lot of stuff here. Water, a few ions. Alcohol is one of those weird things that we can actually absorb through the stomach lining. Part of the reason if you drink something, you'll feel the alcohol right away, and then if you drink too much, you'll feel really fine, and then it gets to your intestines, you absorb the rest of it, and then you're not good at all. The other thing with emptying of the stomach, it really a lot of times depends on what you've ate. Things that are easier to digest, more liquid, tends to empty it sooner. So anything that's a lot of liquid, it's going to empty the stomach much sooner than something that's a solid. On top of that, the more carbohydrate rich the food is, generally the quicker it can empty. That is an easier thing to digest. It doesn't take as much time. Stomach tends to empty quicker if it's just carbs. Proteins, they're a little bit slower, take a little bit longer to digest because that the stomach empties a little bit slower when you have a protein-rich meal. Fats, we're going to see, are one of the slowest to digest. Because of that, the more fat that is in the meal, again, slower the stomach's going to empty out on that case. Again, the stomach does not mess with itself too much. We have a lot of cellular turnover first off, so lots of turnover of cells. We're always making new cells there because it is a harsh environment anyways. But the big thing that's happening here is we have this bicarb-rich mucus from the surface mucus cells that, if you were to look at the pH of the gastric juice, it's between a pH of 1 and 2. But if you actually look at the cell surface underneath that mucus layer, it's a neutral pH of 7 at the surface of that. Again, it's the fact that these surface mucus cells kick out this layer of alkaline mucus that really neutralizes this and does not allow the stomach to act back upon itself. And really the last thing is sometimes you ingest something that is not good, or you get some type of bacterial toxin in you, your body will stimulate a terrible nerve reflex here, vomiting or emesis. Really, this is in the medulla, actually not too far away from the breathing centers, which is to me always kind of funny because you would think the vomit reflex and the breathing reflexes could work together a little bit more. They don't. But really what it comes down to on this one, when you're going to get sick, you end up taking a deep breath. It's all about pressure and volume. You take a deep breath, get that diaphragm down, puts pressure on all that. Your abs contract. A lot of stuff contracts beneath the diaphragm, which is making that area much smaller, putting pressure on the stomach. If you open the upper sphincter to build up a pressure, higher pressure, it's going to go the one way it can go, which is out of the body. And that is that. So what we'll see next time, we'll start working on the different parts of the small intestine and keep working our way down through the digestive tract.